On today's debut episode of Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez, my film review is the underrated Julie, and a special debut for my first segment, Allow Me to Explain. All this and more starting right now. This is Jordan Ramirez, and you are listening to Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. I am so glad that I am hosting my first podcast episode. Ever since I had hosted my radio show at HCC from 2014 to 2017, I had reviewed every other film, whether it was well-known or obscure, from art house to mainstream, from forgotten to unforgettable films that deserved a second chance. I had previously wrote my own film blog from my previous website at Wix.com, and now I have created a new website on WordPress.com that will contain both my new podcast episodes and my film blogs as well. But don't worry, I will be able to upload these podcast episodes if you missed them on my old website at Wix.com as well. All this and more on my first return back to Film Talk. My first film review is Julie from 1956, from MGM and directed by Andrew L. Stone, starring Doris Day, Louis Jourdan, and Barry Sullivan. The film is a 1950s version of a Bluebeard story in which Julie Benton, played by Doris Day, is married to pianist Lyle Benton, played by Louis Jourdan, and she starts to become suspicious in the death of her first husband, Bob. Well, so this film is an unusual one for me, watching Doris Day play in a film that is not a musical or a film that was shot in color. I would not say that this is a bad movie, but it is a strange film for Doris Day to be in which she plays a character who was cast against type. I mean, this film was made at the same time that she starred in the 1956 version of The Man Who Knew Too Much, directed by Alfred Hitchcock and co-starring James Stewart. The plot, I would not say is bad, but just a bit bare thin and loose. The performances are not overdone from Doris Day and Barry Sullivan. Day's performance as the title character is a bit different, and one of the few times that she was cast against type from her musical performances that she was known for from the 1940s and 50s period. She provides the voiceover, which is a trademark in film noir, and it's a little bit of a mixture of a genre hybrid between film noir and melodrama as well, since she always describes the situations like her husband's job description for one instance, how she wants to get along with her plan of having her husband admit the murder of her first husband, as well as plot progression, describing the situations in the story. And it's one of the few times you ever saw a film in which a female character provides voiceover narration, which was usually reserved for men from this period. But some of the things that I noticed as well are the performances from Doris Day. Her performance in the film is subdued and minimal. I wouldn't say it's overdone, but I couldn't tell whether she was acting frightened or whether she was reliving the painful memories of her first two marriages that she had lived through. I just find that Sullivan's performance as Cliff Henderson, who becomes her literal shield, like sword and shield, against her husband in the movie, he's a bit stoic sometimes, and he's a bit stiff in his performance. The one performance who I found a little bit overdone in the entire film was Lyle Benton, played by Louis Jourdan. His performance can go a little bit off the rails immediately, starting from the beginning of the film when he immediately puts his foot in the gas pedal that Doris Day is driving in her car, and they're almost about to head to their death. But instantly it goes a little bit off the rails from there. So once you see that moment from the beginning of the film all the way up until the near ending of the film, you start to realize that his performance is a little bit overkill for me. Over the period of the film, mostly the plot of the film, his eccentric and overdone antics become almost comical, almost to parody. From stalking Doris Day on the phone, leaving a piano recording in the car, to moments where his threatening scheme seems one-dimensional and cliched, as found in other films from that era. As for the direction of the film by Andrew L. Stone, there is nothing more that I can say about it. His direction feels poised and calm, not as sharp or as different, but it feels more like it's a product of the studio system. is what I could say. But he keeps the tension for the appropriate mood setting, which is usually reserved in other film noirs from the period, and he was known more as a genre director than a director of this genre, because before he used to direct movie musicals, and I can think of one example that may be well known but is not familiar to, I would say, mainstream audiences. It's Stormy Weather from 1943, starring Lena Horne, and this film was made for 20th Century Fox in 1943. It was inducted into the National Film Registry back in 2001. So that's just one of the films that he was known for directing, mostly comedies and escapist entertainment and movie musicals from this period. He didn't go into the film noir genre until the 1950s decade, in which some of his directorial ventures into film noir include Confidence Girl from 1952, The Steel Trap also from 1952, A Blueprint for Murder from 1953, The Night Holds Terror from 1955, and Cry Terror from 1958. His last film that he directed was a musical biopic about Johann Strauss II called The Great Waltz from 1972. So as to how I was introduced to this film, it was not from a friend or from somebody else. It was mostly from this great film that I saw. It was an experimental film called The Green Fog, directed by Guy Madden and co-directed by Evan Johnson. So I saw this film, and there are a few clips of it. I just was not sure of what this film was, so that was basically my introduction to this movie. Before I had watched this film, I was not aware of the production history until I had to do some research. There are a few stories that I could give you that was very interesting that you may not find from the film, but it's in there. So some of the stories that I looked up that are interesting to read, like from IMDb, are that Doris Day's husband producer of the film, named Martin Melcher, was enraged with jealousy like the on-screen relationship portrayed in the movie when she was friendly with her co-star Louis Jourdan, who plays her on-screen husband in the film, or that Melcher insisted on any film or project that she was in must have a product placement of Chevrolet cars that were in almost all of her projects, as well as on the Doris Day show, until she retired from acting. So the film had a gala premiere on October 10th, 1956, and was released nationwide on October 17th. The film gained negative reviews and was even placed in John Wilson's book, The Official Razzie Movie Guide, as one of the most enjoyably bad movies ever made. But I would disagree with him on this one, as well as some of the critics. I wouldn't say that it is a bad movie, but that no matter how ridiculous or how threadbare this plot may seem, I don't realize that it's a bad film. It's just that it was made to be a cautionary tale for women of that period, and it's also decision making from that period of the 1950s decade. But I would say that because it is an impressive film. It's not a great film, but it's an interesting film from a woman's perspective from the 50s decade, even though it was written by the director of the film. And it was a film that Doris Day almost didn't want to be in, but she was persuaded to do it from her husband because he was such a big promoter during this decade of the 1950s period. But yes, that's what I would say about this film. If you have not seen this film, I would highly recommend you see it. But unlike other critics who would give reviews a rating, I would say that for this review, I'm not going to give it a rating of like 10 out of 10 stars or whatever. I'm just going to say that this film is more like a rare gem that is so hard to find. It may be enjoyably bad, but for me, I never saw it as a bad picture. I saw it more of as an entertaining picture, an interesting picture from the period, a film noir from a woman's perspective, and I imagine there may be more of films like this from that period. But that I thought it's a great film from the 1950s perspective with a female twist. But there's a subgenre within film noir known as the woman as victims pictures, and this film I would say is it. If you had not seen it, again, I would highly recommend that you watch it. If you like it, then it's good. If not, then I respect your opinion, and I'm not here to criticize you. I'm just here to say, you know what? It's an entertaining film. Not everybody will like it. It will attract some people who love the film, as well as some detractors who have not been a fan of this film. It's a wonderful film, and I hope you enjoy it. Gigi Sohn, the current nominee for the FCC Democratic Commissioner seat, her nomination has been stalled for almost 10 and a half months due to successful campaign tactics from big tech companies, and also because of the excuses from Senator Schumer and other Democratic members of the Senate who keep saying we don't have the votes. Well, I would say that this is one of the worst arguments and also one of the worst excuses that someone in Congress has ever put out, and it's not a decent statement. So, as to how we got here and why the situation looks so dire and what can be done to pressure the key senators to vote to confirm Gigi Sohn to the FCC, we have to go back to the beginning. In October of 2021, the Biden White House made an announcement in which Jessica Rosenworcel, who was another Democratic FCC commissioner, would become the FCC chair, and that Gigi Sohn, a favorite amongst progressives, including me, would be nominated to fill in the position of the third empty Democratic commissioner seat at the FCC. When the nomination was announced, progressives both in and outside Washington, D.C. were thrilled with Biden's decision. However, she would face stiff opposition from one or many major opponents, big tech. The reason why big tech companies are afraid of her is because she will regulate the big tech companies' every move when it comes to pricing, promoting competition, cracking down monopoly power, and protecting consumers. After her nomination was announced, some of the GOP senators have started putting out statements and even tweeted on social media with different excuses as to why they would oppose her confirmation to the FCC. Their main argument, the GOP's main argument, is very simple. It's because they believe that when Gigi Sohn is given the nomination and is confirmed to the FCC, she would censor conservatives. It had been the main talking point on Breitbart, Tucker Carlson, and by other GOP senators in the Senate who oppose her nomination. On Lindsey Graham's Twitter post marked November 9th, he put on his social media post, quote, Gigi Sohn is a complete political ideologue who has disdain for conservatives. She would be a complete nightmare for the country when it comes to regulating the airwaves. The Wall Street Journal, however, at the same concurrence as this tweet post was put on November 9th, put out a similar statement on their op-ed piece the day before called A Media Censor for the FCC. Their evidence for opposing her nomination is from this excerpt of holding Sinclair Broadcasting accountable after it lied to regulators to try to get its merger with Tribune Broadcasting in 2018. Tom Tillis on December 1st wrote a letter to the president saying that he must remove Gigi Sohn from her nomination for the FCC, in which he referred to Sohn as an anti-copyright activist. In her first confirmation hearing on December 1st, the same day that Senator Tillis put out that particular tweet, Senators Dan Sullivan from Alaska and Ted Cruz from Texas repeated the same talking point that Lindsey Graham and the Wall Street Journal editorial board had made about complaints about Sohn's tweets criticizing Fox News and her criticism of Sinclair Broadcasting Group. But the strangest irony in all of this is that her biggest allies in support of her in her nomination is OAN and Newsmax. OAN's president Charles Herring released a statement saying, quote, she believes in the First Amendment and the advantages of a strong and open media for the benefit of our democracy. She is one of the most knowledgeable persons I know on FCC issues and has the common sense and desire to work with people on both sides of the aisle. But that didn't stop the big tech and media companies and their lobbyists by trying to target key Democratic senators to oppose her nomination. One of those senators who has not stated her position for Gigi Sohn is Kyrsten Sinema, who had not stated whether she was for or against her confirmation. As the months passed by, her nomination was gridlocked in a tie between the Democrats and Republicans in the subcommittee. It was the first time they had done it. Then they had another hearing in which to alleviate one of the senators' main concerns, and then they tried to break the tie again, but it ended up in a gridlock. While it seemed more like 9 months, which is now like 10 and a half months now, since her nomination was stalled before a full vote in the Senate, telecom and media giant lobbyists have been swarming around D.C. targeting the key votes for Sohn's nomination. They include Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Mark Kelly of Arizona, and Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada. Now, the key players who have been working overtime to make sure that Sohn's nomination is scuttled are the Fraternal Order of Police, who oppose her nomination due to encryption, the Directors Guild of America, AT&T, Comcast, Amazon, AstroTurf campaigns from those same companies, such as Rural Texas School Association, U.S. Cattlemen's Association, etc., and even former Democratic Senator Heidi Heitkamp, who was hired by big tech lobbyists. So there is enough reason to worry why Sohn's nomination will be scuttled and that Biden would have to renominate her the next year, or he would scrap her nomination with someone else who was more centrist. The reason why they want her nomination dead is simple. They want the FCC to remain gridlocked so that it would not implement telecom monopoly, media consolidation, or consumer protection reform. Another reason why Sohn's nomination seems not to have gained traction is because some news reports like Fox Business indicate that the votes are not there, or it's because they don't want to acknowledge the fact that they also supported some of the big tech companies that they had put out for their nominee, which was part of what the Biden administration was doing since June of this year. And for me, it seems, I don't know, I seem really pissed off at this because of what they have been doing. But this isn't coming from me. mostly. I have been following this almost all the time, trying to get to what is going on in the White House and to why they are not boosting her when they should have done it months ago. So what is the connection to what I have mentioned before about those key Democratic senators? Well, according to Fox Business, there was a rumor that the two Democratic senators who said they would not vote for her nomination are Catherine Cortez Masto and Mark Kelly. Now, Mark Kelly and Catherine Cortez Masto are in a tight spot at the moment because they are the two vulnerable Democratic senators who are up for re-election this year. That's why they are really at the moment unsure about whether to support her nomination. Joe Manchin, it didn't seem like he had a stance on what he wanted to say about whether he was for or against Gigi Sohn's nomination, as well as Kyrsten Sinema, who also remains undecided at the moment. So the options that the Democratic Senate, led by Chuck Schumer, as well as the White House have are to wait after Election Day to get her nomination confirmed, or to pull her nomination and replace her with a centrist, which I would say is one of the most idiotic and backfiring moments that the White House or the Democratic Senate would put forward. But I'm not the only one who was really pissed off by the Senate stalling her nomination due to big tech's campaigns and lobbyists trying to stall it. Some of the big nonprofit organizations who are trying to keep this story alive and are not trying to keep this story from moving on are some of the best nonprofit organizations, and when it comes to issues like privacy and so on and so forth. And these are Free Press, Fight for the Future, Electronic Frontier Foundation, Media Justice, and so on. They have been working overtime and around the clock with helpful social media campaigns, digital projects, billboards, and even by placing the trucks in front of the offices of key Democratic senators to confirm Gigi Sohn and why her nomination is so important to get her confirmed to the FCC. I, for one, would say to any listener out there to keep calling your senators, sign up for the website that I have mentioned, and they will give you the tools you need to bring her nomination to the full Senate and to get the attention of both the White House and to Congress. And this has been Allow Me to Explain. You have been listening to Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez. Make sure that you go to my website, filmtalkwithjordanramirez.com. This podcast will not yet be available on any podcasting platform, but it will be available on my website. You can contact me on my social media feeds such as LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I am also available on Letterboxd. If there is a film that you recommend that I would put for my next review, make sure to submit it to my social media accounts. And until then, I'll see you at the movies.